Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. After the previous video in which we sort of spoke about the thing that we were the most wrong about in the Watts case, and this was regarding the time of the doctor's appointment, someone actually made a really good comment, something I'm not sure if I'd even considered in terms of this case. And having written so many books, I've tried to think of everything. But it was basically the point made that Shanann probably set that 9:05 reminder based on dropping the kids off at school, and then she was going to go straight from there to the doctor's appointment. That would make sense because the Women's Health Center in Erie was 4.4 miles from Primrose School. So it would sort of make sense to go straight from there. It was also equidistant from the Watts home, but it would make more sense to go from there having dropped the children off already. I'm not quite sure what time the school would start. Does anyone know? Does anyone know what time Primrose School would start in the morning? The website gives the time as 6:30 a.m., which is really early. I just sort of wonder what time the classes, the kindergarten would normally sort of kick off. If anyone knows, please let us know in the comments. So in this episode, I want to talk about just something that came across my radar today. It was just a question that someone sent to me. And although I know the answer, some of you may not be aware of it and may not have thought about it. And it's this question on was Chris Watts Mirandized? And of course, this is a very important question because procedurally, if he wasn't, or if he wasn't Mirandized properly or timeously, then he would have every right to appeal. And so that's really the issue here. So we're going to refer to the discovery, but before we get there, my goodness, so much is happening in true crime right now. The Laurie Vallow case, there seem to be motions every second day. The Suzanne Morphew case, there are so many revelations, although we're not sure what to make of them. One of the latest is the kind of speculation that Suzanne's remains might have been left sort of at the construction site. That's something that I've analyzed briefly on Patreon. And then also there's this 4-part documentary coming on ESPN. I think it starts tomorrow. And I'm already quite, I guess, emotional because of the way the director's been saying, well, all the journalists who heard Oscar speak believed him, also in court. And I think he also said that he doesn't know whether Oscar's guilty based on what time in the morning he wakes up or what time of day it is or something like that. And I covered the Oscar Pistorius case. That was the first high-profile crime I covered. And it kind of just offends my sensibilities to hear statements like that. Because, of course, the journalists were wrong. The journalists, whether they thought he was innocent or not, or believed him or not, is actually irrelevant. It is what the court said. And so the director quoting the journalists seems a bit strange to me. I do think that there's probably a kind of, how can I put it, almost putting things in a light that's going to favor Oscar in a way, and in exchange for that, you would sort of have his family gracing the director with their presence. So in other words, if you don't go into this area and you don't talk about that, then we will participate, kind of thing. That's the impression I get. I don't know if it's true. In any event, let me first just thank the 15,000 subscribers to this channel. I think in the previous episode, we weren't quite there yet, but now we are. But it is good to have all of you here. I think we actually had 15.1 at the moment. So it's good to have you here. If you haven't subscribed, I will be talking a little bit about the Watts case in the coming week, just looking at things like What are they? Besides what we're doing now, did Chris Watts speak to Shanann that morning? So that's something we're going to talk about early next week. Okay, so if you're interested in that, please subscribe, like, share, leave a comment. If you do share, please use the hashtag TCRS, for example, on Twitter. Okay, and let's get started. So if we go to the discovery, it's not very, this is not a very complicated issue to navigate or explain. The question is, was Chris Watts Mirandized? And the answer is, yes, he was. And then you might say, well, when was he Mirandized? And it's quite simple. He was Mirandized on Wednesday morning, August 15th, a little bit after 11 o'clock. I think he was Mirandized by Agent Tammy Lee from the Colorado Bureau of Investigation. That is in the discovery on page 581. And what she writes, or what Tammy Lee's statement is that I greeted Chris inside the interview room and the door was shut. I told Chris the door automatically locks from the inside, but there was a key inserted into the lock that could be turned to open the door. Why this is important is to say, to emphasize that whatever he was doing was voluntary. So you have this kind of strange situation where the door could lock and there was this locking mechanism, but you need to kind of emphasize to your suspect, you're free to leave whenever, and if you want to open the door, we'll open the door, but the door can also lock, kind of thing. Anyway, Tammy Lee says, I also explained to Chris the door was shut for privacy, but he was not under arrest and could leave at any time. Of course, what was it? About 12 hours later, he couldn't leave, and he was under arrest, right? Chris said he understood. It should be noted, this is italicized, I was not wearing a gun, badge, handcuffs, magazines, or any other police insignia during the polygraph and interview. It's quite interesting, this admission, just to say that she communicated verbally the situation, but she didn't really kind of identify herself in a formal way. Now, can you imagine if Chris Watts was interviewed? I don't know whether to use the word interviewed or interrogated, because actually he was being interrogated. From his perspective, he was being interviewed. We just want to talk to you. And now we're going to have a polygraph, and that's going to be a very, very, very long conversation going on for hours. Well, actually, it's not a conversation. It's also an interrogation. One just wonders if you had a guy with a uniform on talking to Chris Watts, whether it said CBI or FBI, whether Chris Watts would have been as comfortable as he was. I don't think so. Then in the next paragraph, she writes, next, CBI's polygraph procedures were explained to Chris. I read Chris his Miranda rights, there it is, and explained to him that he did not have to talk to me. Now, this was actually a vital moment, and I think one that many have kind of underestimated and sort of appreciated. Because when his rights were read, he's kind of being informed in that setting, you don't need to talk to us. You have these rights. You have the right to remain silent. You have the right to an attorney. And what does he do? I don't know, was he thinking at that point? Was he just sort of going, well, I need to be the good guy here because yesterday I said I would do the polygraph. Now I'm here. Now what? Chris Watts was used to being told kind of what to do, wasn't he? So what did he do? He signed the advisement of rights form, stating he understood his rights and wished to continue with the interview and polygraph. That's the other thing is, even if they had it on camera, they needed it signed. It needed to be documented, and fortunately it was. So the cops kind of really knew what they were doing, going into this. Chris also signed a consent form indicating his willingness to undergo polygraph examination. So that was a separate form as well. And then the polygraph sort of commences. I'm just, out of interest sake, going to play that moment just so that you remember it. That moment when he's Mirandized.
So Chris, this is the advisement and rights form. This just says that Agent Tammy Lee says, I'm an agent with the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, and I wish to talk to you about obviously the disappearance of Bella and Celeste Watts, okay? You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to talk to a lawyer and to have him present with you while you're being questioned. If you cannot afford to hire a lawyer, one will be appointed to represent you before any questioning if you wish. You can decide at any time to exercise these rights and not answer any questions or make any statements. Do you understand each of those rights? Were they read to you, Chris? So I'll just have you write, I guess, when we get to that. And then having those rights in mind, do you wish to talk to me now and obviously go through with the polygraph? Okay, perfect. So what I want you to do is go ahead and answer both of those as yeses, if you still agree with that, and then sign and date that signature line, if you would. Have you always been a Tar Heels fan?
Yes. 15th?
It is, yep. My son is like a huge Tar Heels fan. I don't even know why he likes them, but maybe because the Nuggets suck. I don't know.
Well, Carl used to coach here too, and he was a Carolina guy.
Oh, he was?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
So at this point, it probably goes without saying that Tammy Lee does an amazing job putting him at ease. She actually, instead of having it quite intimidating, where she's looking at him and he's looking at her, and she's reading him the rights and, you know, possibly going to scare him or frighten him, she instead focuses attention on the pad, and she sort of leans in, has him rather look at the writing, and she's already kind of set him up for what's going to follow. She's already told him about her training, and that and this is at about 11 minutes into him arriving at the station. So there's been a fair amount of discussion already where she's smiled at him and they've chuckled and joked, and you hear a little bit of that sort of at the end, but she kind of puts him in a situation where, you know, everybody does this, it's completely normal, and it's normal to feel anxious and blah 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 blah. And then did you notice that she kind of says to him, you need to, she tells him, she kind of orders him to mark yes for he understands his rights, and yes that he will take the polygraph. And immediately after saying that he must do that, she says kind of like, well, if you want to, kind of thing.
So I'll just have you write, I guess, when we get to that. And then having those rights in mind, do you wish to talk to me now and obviously go through with the polygraph? Okay, perfect. So what I want you to do is go ahead and answer both of those as yeses, if you still agree with that, and then sign and date that signature line, if you would.
It might seem like a nitpicky thing to say that she tells him to sort of sign yes, but it's not as obvious as you might think. She doesn't sort of just read him his rights, she actually tells him to tick the box yes, and she does say if you still agree with it, but she's also saying that within the context of telling him to do it, which means he's kind of boxed in. Obviously he could stop her and just say, no, I'm actually not going to do that, but he's sort of already in the nice guy role, and she's corralling him kind of into the nice guy, well, just go with the flow thing as well, isn't she? And then what happens is he signs the form. I guess he signs the advisement and he signs the polygraph form. They're two forms, and then that is it. This was essentially the last kind of formal procedural moment where he could have kind of stopped everything. He could have just said no, and his father was there. He could have said, well, I just want to talk to my father about this. And of course, the very next time he saw his father, which I think was around about 5 hours later, within a few, I want to say seconds, but barely 1 or 2 minutes of him talking to his father, his father says, don't you think you should get a lawyer? And as soon as that happens, the agents kind of run back into the room. All of this takes place between around about 11 o'clock and 11 minutes and about 11:13. He basically has finished signing the documents at 13 minutes past 11 on the 15th, on the Wednesday. I've done a quick look and I can't find the document in the discovery for where he signed it. I'm sure that they do have it. The discovery does jump from page 611 to 613, so that might be the intervening page with his signature. But what is interesting is, while he's sort of signing it, Tammy changes the subject to the Tar Heels and kind of gets his mind off what he's just done. And it's all kind of done with the idea of going with the flow and not worrying too much about something that he really ought to be thinking about and worrying about. If you found this interesting, I'm going to be referring to something else in the discovery, this time something more applicable to video. In fact, the Trinastich video between Sunday and Wednesday, when the Chris Watts documentary appears on Netflix. I'm just going to talk about something there which I think is a little bit misunderstood. So I will be talking about this thing that some people argue about, that Chris Watts definitely spoke to Shanann that morning, that she got into bed, that she had to have gotten into bed because she changed her shirt and all that kind of thing. I'm going to address that in a separate video. That'll either be tomorrow or Monday, I expect. For those who like to read print books, Two-Face Rape of Cassandra, that's book 4 in the 9-part Two-Face series, that is out in paperback. I think it's got 30 reviews now. It is one of the most, or the best reviewed books in the series. So if you're interested in reading about that, definitely that book has got some content that isn't in the other books, and I think it's definitely one of the most powerful books and meaningful books and far-reaching books of the series. What I'll also be doing at some point is I'm going to be taking you through my best reviewed books on Amazon, on Amazon.com and Amazon.co.uk. Believe it or not, there are some books that are kind of a full house of 5 stars, and obviously books like that, you might want to, if you're going to read one book, you might want to start with the best reviewed book and see what True Crime Rocket Science is all about, if you haven't already. On Patreon, I've just told my patrons that I've even written a book about the 96 Everest disaster, and actually examining that from the perspective of Mount Everest as a crime scene. What were the motives of the climbers? What were the circumstances? What were the underlying dynamics? What was the situation with the weather? Was it the weather or human error? And so that's also a very interesting application of true crime. And I've written 3 books based on the Everest disaster. Bear in mind, next year is the 25-year anniversary of that. And so that's it for today. So not a very long episode. Thank you for listening. Look out for the Oscar Pistorius documentary, The Life and Trials of Oscar Pistorius. I think it's 4 episodes on ESPN starting tomorrow on Sunday, the 27th of September, and then around about 3 days later on the 30th is a Netflix documentary, I think much anticipated, on Chris Watts, and it's called American Murder, The Family Next Door. I'll be providing analysis of the documentary and what they say in that on Patreon from October the 1st onwards. I'm also covering the Laurie Vallow case, and I'm also providing ongoing coverage for high-profile cases on Patreon. So if you're interested in that, head to Patreon/TCRS. We also have discussions. We're having a discussion tomorrow where a small group of patrons put up their hands to say, I want to talk about that and that and that, and then we get together and we have a fairly intimate conversation, and then that recording is put on Patreon for everyone else to listen to. So if you're interested in that kind of thing, it's a really nice community there. Head on over to Patreon/TCRS. Thank you for listening. Have a great weekend, and I'll see you guys next time.